The message arrived on my phone just as I was pouring a cup of coffee in the quiet of the early morning. It was from Jake, my partner of 6 years, the man I had trusted with my heart and my future. The words were brief, cold, and devastating. "I'm leaving. It's Lily." I stared at the screen, my hand trembling, the mug slipping slightly before I caught it. Lily, my own sister. The thought felt like a jagged knife twisting inside me, sharp and unforgiving. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to set the phone down on the counter without letting the shock show. I wasn't one to crumble easily, not after the years of building a life filled with love and mutual dreams. But this betrayal was different, closer, darker, and more personal than anything I'd ever faced. My mind reeled, searching for answers amidst the betrayal that cut deeper than I had imagined possible. In the days leading up to the message, subtle signs had begun to surface, though I'd chosen to ignore them, unwilling to confront the reality until now. Secretive glances at Jake's phone, unexplained absences, and a sudden coldness in his demeanor had unsettled me. I remembered the times Lily had called just a little too often, always stepping out when I entered the room. And then there were the late-night messages I'd glimpsed on Jake's screen, cryptic and brief, sent at hours when everyone else was asleep. The pieces had been there, scattered but ignored, like a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. I sat down at the kitchen table, the early sunlight filtering through the curtains and casting long shadows across the floor. My mind began to piece together the clues I'd missed. The weekend he'd claimed was a work trip but came home smelling faintly of Lily's perfume, the dinners they'd accidentally run into each other at, the hushed phone calls exchanged between them. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it was a quieter, fiercer resolve beginning to grow inside me. I wasn't going to break. Without a word to anyone, I began gathering evidence. Screenshots of messages, photos, receipts from restaurants and hotels, and notes on every suspicious encounter. Each piece was a small victory, proof that I was in control despite the chaos swirling around me. I wasn't going to be blindsided by this. I would face it head-on, armed with facts and clarity. The first step, I realized, was to confirm everything beyond a doubt. Doubt had a way of undermining your strength, and I couldn't afford that. I reached out to a private detective, someone discreet and professional, to follow the threads I couldn't unravel myself. His name was Sam, and in our brief conversation, I sensed an understanding that went beyond the usual client and service provider. He promised discretion and thoroughness, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe justice could be found in the unraveling. Meanwhile, I kept my interactions with Jake as controlled and measured as possible. His messages were arrogant and dismissive, dripping with a cruel confidence that he was untouchable. "You'll get over it," he wrote once, as if pain was something I could simply brush aside. But I wasn't going to play the victim. I replied with calm, calculated words, never revealing the storm gathering beneath my surface. Each message was a chess move, a way to keep him off balance while I prepared my own strategy. At home, the atmosphere shifted into an uneasy quiet. Lily's visits became less frequent, but their secret meetings continued, hidden beneath the surface of family gatherings and casual check-ins. I watched them both carefully, noting every glance and every whispered word. The betrayal was a wound, but it was also a mirror reflecting truths I hadn't wanted to see about the people closest to me. I found strength in small rituals, morning runs before the world woke up, late-night journaling to empty my mind, and phone calls with a trusted friend who knew nothing of the situation but offered steady support. These moments of normalcy became my anchor, reminding me that I was more than the sum of this heartbreak. The harder I looked, the more cracks I found in Jake's story. Sam's reports trickled in, painting a picture far more complicated than just a simple affair. There were inconsistencies, unexplained transfers, and meetings that didn't fit the narrative Jake had spun. I held on to these details tightly, knowing that each one was a thread that could unravel the entire deception. One afternoon, as sunlight warmed the living room, I confronted Jake directly. Not with anger or tears, but with quiet determination. I laid out what I knew, not accusing, but stating facts. His reaction was telling, defensive, evasive, and yet tinged with a flicker of guilt that betrayed his otherwise arrogant facade. The conversation ended with no resolution, but I walked away feeling a measure of power I hadn't expected to find. Throughout this ordeal, I was careful to keep my plans hidden. Family members noticed my distant demeanor, some whispered about the tension between us, but no one knew the full story. I wasn't ready for sympathy or confrontation. Instead, I was preparing for what came next: legal counsel, financial security, and a plan to protect myself from the fallout. In the quiet moments before sleep, would replay the timeline in my mind, piecing together every detail that led to this moment. There was pain, yes, but also a growing clarity. I wasn't just a victim of their betrayal, I was a woman reclaiming her narrative, one calculated step at a time. The first chapter of this painful story was written in betrayal and heartbreak, but beneath it lay the foundation of resilience. I had been blindsided, yes, but I was far from defeated. The path ahead was uncertain, tangled with emotions and challenges I hadn't faced before. But I was ready to walk it, with my eyes wide open and my heart guarded yet unbroken. As the days passed, I found myself less defined by what had happened and more by what I intended to do next. The journey had begun, not just to uncover the truth but to reclaim my life from the wreckage left behind. And in that quiet resolve, I found the first glimmer of hope shining through the darkness. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, each step uncertain but necessary. I maintained a facade of calm when I responded to Jake's messages, careful not to reveal the storm brewing beneath. His tone remained arrogant, as if the betrayal was some trivial game he was winning. "You'll never understand what this is to me," he texted one morning, a mix of condescension and misplaced sincerity. I replied with a simple, measured, "I understand more than you think." It was a small assertion of control, a reminder that I was no longer passive in this narrative. Sam, the detective I had hired, became my unseen ally. His initial report was thorough, mapping out the timeline of Jake's betrayals with precision. He uncovered meetings and exchanges that I had only suspected, confirming that Jake and Lily's affair was deeper and longer than either had admitted. But what surprised me most were the inconsistencies Sam found in Jake's stories, little cracks that hinted at something more than just a romantic deception. One evening, Sam called with news that shifted my perspective entirely. "There's something off about Jake's finances," he said quietly. "Transactions that don't match up with his claims about work or personal expenses. It looks like he's been moving money in ways that don't make sense at face value." His words hit me like a punch. I had always trusted Jake with our shared finances, never imagining he could be using them against me. I spent the next few days quietly consulting a lawyer, a woman named Claire who specialized in family law and had a reputation for toughness and discretion. Our first meeting was brief but intense. I laid out the situation, the evidence I had gathered, and Sam's preliminary findings about financial irregularities. Claire listened carefully, her eyes sharp and focused. "We need to act fast," she said. "Protect your assets, freeze joint accounts if possible, and document everything. This isn't just about personal betrayal anymore, it's legal, and you need to be prepared." Following her advice, I moved quickly. I contacted the bank to discuss our joint accounts, requesting holds on any large withdrawals or transfers. I set up separate accounts under my name alone, transferring what savings I could access without raising suspicion. Every action was taken quietly, without alerting Jake or Lily. I realized then that this was no longer just about heartbreak, it was about safeguarding my future. Meanwhile, Sam's surveillance continued with quiet efficiency. His reports came regularly, painting a detailed picture of Jake and Lily's increasingly desperate attempts to build a new life together. They had started making plans to relocate, scouting neighborhoods and looking at rental properties. But the cracks were growing wider. Financial transactions flagged by Sam suggested Jake's money was drying up, and some of the funds appeared to be coming from sources I never expected. One afternoon, Sam's voice over the phone was low but urgent. "Jake's been funneling money into accounts linked to businesses that don't seem legitimate. I'm looking into possible fraud or worse. This could mean bigger trouble for him." I felt a chill run through me. The man I had loved, the man who had betrayed me so deeply, was now entangled in something far more dangerous. I kept my interactions with Jake minimal, responding only when necessary and always with guarded words. He seemed frustrated, sensing that I was no longer the woman who would quietly accept his betrayal. His arrogance began to crack ever so slightly, replaced by a thin veneer of desperation. "You don't know what you're getting into," he warned in one message, a veiled threat that only strengthened my resolve. Lily, too, became distant. Our family gatherings grew tense, the unspoken truth hanging heavily in the air. She avoided my gaze, her usual confident smile replaced by something brittle and uncertain. I didn't confront her directly. I was still gathering strength and evidence, knowing that the right moment to face her would come. Throughout this time, I balanced my days with careful normalcy. I kept my job, met friends for coffee, and made sure my family didn't suspect the full extent of the turmoil beneath the surface. But every night, I pored over Sam's reports and legal advice, planning my next moves with precision. The betrayal had fractured my world, but it had also sharpened my focus. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, my laptop open to the latest detective report, I realized how far I had come from the woman who had received that first devastating message. I was no longer simply hurt, I was empowered by knowledge and preparation. I wasn't waiting for Jake to make his next move, I was anticipating it, ready to counteract with facts and strategy. Claire became a steady presence, her guidance invaluable as I navigated the murky waters of legal protection and financial security. We discussed filing for temporary orders to freeze assets and prevent any further financial damage. I felt a small measure of relief knowing that, despite the emotional chaos, I was taking tangible steps to protect myself. At the same time, I noticed the subtle unraveling of Jake and Lily's plans. The new life they had fantasized about was slipping through their fingers. Rumors reached me through mutual acquaintances, missed payments, arguments over money, and growing distrust between them. It was a slow, painful collapse, but one I watched with a quiet satisfaction. Even as the external world shifted, I remained focused inward. I kept a journal, documenting every detail, every emotion, and every piece of evidence. It was a way to keep control, a private space where I could process the betrayal without losing myself. I wrote about the small victories and the setbacks, the moments of doubt and the growing strength that followed. One afternoon, I received a call from Sam that felt like a pivotal moment. "I've uncovered some hidden communications between Jake and a third party. It looks like there's more to this than you realize." The revelation sent a new wave of questions crashing through my mind. What else was Jake hiding? How deep did this web go? I sat back, feeling the weight of the situation settle around me. The calm before the storm, I thought. Everything was falling into place, but the hardest battles were still ahead. I was no longer just a woman betrayed, I was a woman preparing to reclaim her life from the wreckage. The days blurred into a routine of quiet preparation and subtle confrontation. I remained composed in public, even as my world was quietly dismantled behind closed doors. Jake's arrogance was slowly replaced by anxiety, and Lily's confidence faded with every passing day. Meanwhile, I gathered strength from the knowledge that I was not alone. I had allies, experts, and a clear path forward. In the stillness of each evening, I reminded myself that this was not the end. It was a turning point, a moment to gather courage and clarity. The betrayal had shattered the illusion of trust, but it hadn't broken me. I was ready for whatever came next, armed with truth and determination. The air between Lily and me at family gatherings had grown thick with unspoken words and simmering tension. What had once been easy smiles and casual conversations now felt like a battlefield, each glance loaded with accusation and regret. I avoided direct confrontation for as long as I could, but the weight of betrayal was becoming impossible to ignore. The fragile alliances within our family were fracturing, and I could feel the pressure mounting on every side. One afternoon, I finally confronted Lily alone. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where whispers could be lost amid the hum of conversations and clinking cups. She arrived with a hesitant smile that didn't reach her eyes, the confident sister I once knew replaced by someone fragile and uncertain. "I know," she said simply, before I had the chance to speak. Her admission was both a relief and a sting. I looked at her, searching for the sister I had trusted, but all I saw was a woman caught in the consequences of her own choices. "Why?" was all I could manage. Lily's explanation was a tangle of emotions, regret, confusion, and a desperate need for forgiveness. But beneath her words, I sensed a deeper fracture. The family I thought was unbreakable was now divided, with relatives quietly taking sides. Some sympathized with her, blinded by loyalty or denial. Others whispered behind closed doors, quietly rooting for my vindication but afraid to speak openly. Meanwhile, Sam's investigation uncovered more than just emotional betrayals. His latest report revealed that Jake had been siphoning money from our accounts, funneling funds into shadowy businesses and fake companies. The scale of his deception went far beyond personal betrayal. It was financial fraud, and I was at the center of it. Reading the report in the stillness of my living room, I felt a simmering anger rise. Jake had not only shattered my trust but had also endangered my financial security. The man I had loved had been using my resources to fund a life built on lies with my own sister. Armed with this new information, I met with Claire again. Her eyes darkened with concern as I laid out the evidence. "This changes everything," she said. "We're not just dealing with a broken relationship, this is criminal. We need to act swiftly to protect you and hold him accountable." The legal strategy shifted. Claire filed motions to freeze all joint assets and began proceedings to investigate Jake's financial dealings. I felt a mix of relief and dread, relief that justice might be within reach, dread for the battles that were sure to come. Jake's response was predictable but increasingly desperate. His messages turned from arrogance to threats, attempts to discredit me and paint me as vindictive. "You're destroying us," he accused in one text, a thinly veiled attempt to guilt me into silence. But I refused to be intimidated. I had proof, and I was ready to use every piece of it. The fallout rippled through our social circles. Friends who once greeted me warmly now looked away, unsure whom to believe. Yet, as evidence mounted, the tide began to turn. More people reached out quietly, offering support and sharing their own stories of betrayal and resilience. I wasn't alone in this battle. Family gatherings became a minefield. Some relatives confronted me with veiled skepticism, others with open hostility on Jake and Lily's behalf. But as I quietly presented facts and shared documented evidence, the shifting allegiances became clear. Slowly, more family members began to see the truth beneath the lies. Jake's attempts to cover his tracks grew frantic. He deleted accounts, changed phone numbers, and tried to manipulate mutual friends to vouch for him. But Sam's meticulous work had already captured enough to expose the full extent of his fraud. I watched as his world began to crumble, brick by brick, built not on love but on deceit and desperation. One evening, Sam shared a particularly damning discovery, a series of emails between Jake and an unknown associate, discussing plans to embezzle funds and hide assets abroad. The implications were staggering. This was no longer just a personal betrayal, it was a criminal conspiracy, and I was caught in the middle. I sat back, absorbing the weight of it all. The man I had once trusted completely was now unmasked as a liar and a fraudster. The sister I had loved was entangled in his schemes, their relationship a facade hiding deeper betrayals. Despite the chaos, I found strength in the clarity. The evidence was undeniable, and my resolve to protect myself and seek justice only hardened. The more Jake tried to shift blame and sow doubt, the more his own actions illuminated the truth. I continued to document everything: phone calls, messages, financial statements, and witness accounts. My journal became a chronicle of betrayal and resilience, a record I knew would be crucial in the battles ahead. Each entry was a reminder that I was no longer a victim but a woman fighting back with every tool at her disposal. Friends who had once been distant began to rally around me, offering their support and encouragement. Their belief in my strength bolstered my own, reminding me that I was not defined by Jake's betrayal but by my response to it. The family fractures deepened, but I stood firm. I refused to be silenced or isolated. Instead, I faced the storm with a quiet determination that surprised even me. The truth was my weapon, and I wielded it carefully but relentlessly. Jake's desperation culminated in an attempt to intimidate me through legal threats and public smears. But Claire was prepared. She countered with evidence-backed responses, pushing back against his baseless claims. The legal battle was just beginning, but I felt ready. Through it all, I learned the painful lesson that betrayal often comes dressed in layers, emotional, financial, and legal. But beneath those layers, there was a core of strength I hadn't fully realized I possessed until now. Every confrontation, every piece of evidence collected, and every moment of doubt overcome was a step toward reclaiming my life. The path was fraught with challenges, but I was no longer walking it blindly. As I prepared for the next phase, I reflected on how far I had come, from the initial shock of discovery to the gathering storm of confrontation and truth. The journey was painful and exhausting, but it was also transformative. I was no longer the woman crushed by betrayal. I was a force determined to expose the lies, protect what was mine, and rebuild from the ruins. The fight was far from over, but with every revelation, I moved closer to justice, and to healing. The weeks that followed marked a turning point in my life, a shift from chaos and heartbreak to quiet empowerment. As the legal wheels began to turn, I found myself reclaiming control not only over my finances but over my sense of self. The evidence we had gathered was formidable, and Claire's expertise gave me confidence that the law would recognize the depth of Jake's deceit. I began to rebuild the boundaries Jake had shattered. I closed joint accounts, transferred assets into my name alone, and worked with financial advisors to secure my future. Each step was a small victory, a reclaiming of the security he had tried to strip away. It was a painstaking process, but with every signed document and secured account, I felt the weight of betrayal lift just a little. Meanwhile, Jake's world was unraveling. Word spread quietly through mutual friends and acquaintances about his fraudulent activities and the legal actions underway. His relationship with Lily, once cloaked in secrecy and excitement, began to crumble under the pressure. Whispers reached me of heated arguments and mutual recriminations as their dream of a new life together dissolved. I kept my distance from the drama, focusing instead on my own recovery. Friends who had been silent during the initial shock now stepped forward with support and encouragement. Their kindness reminded me that I was not alone, and their belief in my strength fueled my own resolve. Family dynamics remained complicated. Some relatives reached out to express regret over their earlier support for Jake and Lily. Others remained distant, unwilling, or unable to face the truth. I accepted their responses without bitterness, knowing that my priority was to protect myself and move forward. Claire and I strategized carefully, preparing for the inevitable court battles. Jake's legal team attempted to paint me as vindictive and motivated by spite, but Claire countered with meticulous documentation of the fraud and betrayal. The judge was persuaded to freeze shared assets and order Jake to account for the funds he had taken. It was a crucial victory, one that sent a clear message that I was serious about protecting what was mine. As the legal proceedings advanced, Jake's attempts to manipulate the situation became more desperate and transparent. He tried to enlist family members and mutual friends to speak on his behalf, but the evidence was overwhelming. His credibility eroded, and with it, the facade of control he had clung to. During this time, I focused on rebuilding my life beyond the courtroom. I returned to work with renewed energy, pouring myself into projects and goals that had been sidelined by the emotional toll of betrayal. My social circle expanded as new friendships formed, born out of shared experiences and mutual support. One afternoon, while reviewing documents with Claire, I realized how far I had come. The woman who had once been blindsided by a cruel text was now a force to be reckoned with, calm, focused, and unyielding. The pain of betrayal had transformed into a wellspring of strength I hadn't known I possessed. My resilience did not go unnoticed. Friends and colleagues began to see me as a symbol of empowerment, someone who had turned personal tragedy into a platform for growth. Invitations to speak at local women's groups and business forums followed, opportunities one embraced with gratitude and purpose. Jake's family reached out cautiously, expressing regret for having believed his lies. I listened politely but maintained my distance, aware that my focus needed to remain on my own healing and future. Their attempts to mediate were met with firm boundaries. I was done being caught in the crossfire. The legal battles dragged on, but the outcomes were increasingly favorable. Courts denied Jake's attempts to challenge the settlement, and enforcement actions ensured that the funds he had misappropriated were returned or secured. His financial troubles deepened, and with them, his attempts to deflect blame became more transparent and futile. Through it all, I kept a steady hand on the reins of my life. I documented every interaction, every legal filing, and every step forward. My journal, once a refuge for processing betrayal, had become a chronicle of empowerment and progress. I also took time to reflect on the emotional journey. The anger and hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they no longer controlled me. I had learned to channel those emotions into determination and action, transforming pain into purpose. As my boutique began to flourish again, fueled in part by the local community support and the story that had quietly spread, I found joy in the everyday moments that had once seemed impossible to savor. The laughter of customers, the hum of business, and the simple pleasure of a day well spent filled my days with hope. Jake's attempts to undermine me eventually became background noise, overshadowed by my growing success and the strength I projected. His life, once intertwined with mine in so many ways, had become a cautionary tale whispered among mutual acquaintances, a reminder of what happens when deceit and betrayal are met with resilience and truth. Through the storm, I had discovered parts of myself I hadn't known existed. The woman who had received that devastating message was no longer the same. She had grown, adapted, and emerged stronger. The betrayal was no longer a chain but a catalyst. Every victory, legal or personal, every moment of support from friends and strangers alike, reinforced the truth that I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I faced it with a confidence born not of naivety, but of hard-earned wisdom. The transformation was profound. From the ashes of betrayal, I was building a new life, one defined not by the mistakes of others but by my own strength and vision. And as I looked forward, I knew that this was just the beginning of a journey towards something greater. 2 years had passed since the moment Jake's message shattered the life I once knew. The pain of betrayal, the shock of discovering he had left me for my own sister, had transformed into a source of strength and clarity. What started as a private battle had become a public story of resilience, and I found myself standing in places I never imagined possible. I was invited to speak at a women's business conference, an event filled with entrepreneurs and leaders who shared their stories of struggle and triumph. Stepping onto the stage, I felt a mixture of nerves and pride. The room was filled with faces eager to hear how I had turned a devastating personal crisis into a catalyst for growth and empowerment. As I shared my journey, the betrayal, the legal battles, the emotional turmoil, I saw nods of understanding and empathy. I spoke not just of pain but of the fierce determination that had driven me to reclaim my life. I talked about the importance of preparation, of gathering evidence, of seeking help, and most importantly, of believing in oneself even when the world seemed to be falling apart. My boutique, once a small corner shop, had expanded to 5 thriving locations. Its success was fueled not only by my dedication but by the community support, many of whom had followed my story and found inspiration in it. The gossip that once whispered of heartbreak had turned into conversations about strength and perseverance. Jake's life, in stark contrast, had become a cautionary tale. His attempts to challenge the divorce settlement were repeatedly denied, and his legal troubles deepened. His personal relationships crumbled, and financial instability followed. What remained of the man I once loved was a shadow, a reminder of what happens when deception meets accountability. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that Jake's betrayal had not been an ending but a beginning. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, to face pain head-on, and to discover a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The transformation wasn't easy, it was marked by moments of doubt, loneliness, and fierce determination, but it was real. I had learned that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, not necessarily with others, but within oneself. That resilience was not about never falling but about rising every time. That empowerment came from embracing truth, no matter how painful, and using it as a foundation for growth. In sharing my story, I hope to inspire others facing similar betrayals. To show that even the deepest wounds could lead to new, hopeful chapters. That the end of one story might be the beginning of another, stronger, wiser, and more self-directed. As I looked out at the audience, I saw not just faces but futures, women and men who might one day stand where I was, transformed by their own experiences. And in that moment, I understood that my legacy was not just about overcoming betrayal but about embodying the possibility of renewal. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but I faced it with a heart open to hope and a spirit unbroken. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was, finally, free.